All right. Hello, 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 hello to all our friends out there in YouTube land. And you might get this on Facebook, maybe, maybe not. But right now we're on YouTube Live. And again, I am Curtis O. Robinson Sr., the senior pastor at the Faith Church here in Oakland, California. I like to say Central East Oakland, California. And I am one of your hosts for today's segment of Momentum, a stewardship idea. And we're just so glad today to have a great guest with us. However, if in had out, if up had down, if water had wet, you got to have somebody with you to make it all work. I'd like to introduce my guest. We call him Pepper. I am Salt. Elder Jeff Healy from the Westminster Presbyterian Church of Tiburon, California. Hey, Elder, how's it going?
Curtis, every Friday around 1 o'clock comes around, I'm going, how am I going to make it into the weekend? And I get to spend this hour with you.
I know, looking forward to it, right? I look forward to it, buddy.
It's the best. It's the best.
It is. How you doing today?
Good. I mean, it's been a tough week. I haven't been sleeping well for months now.
Okay.
And I'm really, I'm tired. This has been a period every day of more and more stress as we fight our way through this, realizing that we can't do it alone. We got to have God with us. We got to have that help. The cortisol just doesn't go away if you don't sleep.
I love that this morning when you talked about the cortisol.
But we got a friend in Jesus, and we got
yes, sir.
We got to lean on.
Yes, sir. Don't make me run. I'll holler and shout. Wow. So that's great, man. You looking good, man. Looking stealth. Why don't you introduce our guest for today?
I'm honored to do that. As you all know, we had another guest on who's not a classmate, a guy who went to the same school I did named Phil Dillard. Phil is a wonderful, wonderful man. And he said, as we were talking, there's a guy named Keith Koo you got to meet. This guy he's been extraordinarily successful in Silicon Valley. He is a man that puts his shoes on like the two of us every day, but he praises God for every minute of every day. We've just getting to know each other. I'm flattered just to be on a call with him, and I'm humbled to be on the meeting with him today. We're going to learn a lot about Keith today, what he's working on. One thing in particular, in Silicon Valley today, the oppressed minority is Christians.
Wow.
So we're going to talk about that with Keith. We're going to talk about wherever he wants it to go as well. We don't control this. The Spirit controls where we go.
Right.
That being said, we're going to row toward shore at the same time. So hand it back to you.
All right, man. That's great. Keith, cool. Keith, how's it going, man?
It's going well. It's going well. Thank you for having me, Curtis and Jeff.
Man, it's great. And I think this is going to be a great show. So I just say, let's just get in attack mode, brother. And let's get towards it. Let's dismantle this dominant construct. Keith, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm going in reverse in my career, as I like to say. I spent over 2 decades in corporate. It was actually a blessed career. I started off at Wells Fargo when it used to be considered a nice company. In John Maxwell's book, Good to Great, actually featured as a top company. And I kind of rode that wave and got hired by Cisco Systems during the .com era and got to travel around the world, got to do a lot of fun stuff, integrating companies. So every time we bought a company, it was my job to get our technology into the company and make it work. And then the .com crash happened and there was really no M&A at Cisco. And I went into technology partnerships and licensing, handling suppliers and vendors. And, did the moving around from company to company thing and ultimately coming back to Cisco. And finally, I was an executive at MUFG, Mitsubishi Financial Group, running things like third-party risk and technology risk before starting a consulting firm. And the mission there was to help companies get unstuck. And that's where a lot of my startup mentoring advising occurred. I guess I'm better known, because that's work I don't talk about too much. I guess I'm better known that about 3.5 years ago, I started a radio show called Silicon Valley Insider. It's on KDOW and KTRB here in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. And that highlights people like you, people like Jeff, C-level executives, startup founders, investors. It's been really fun. So that's a little bit about me.
That's good. So you started a radio show, or you said you founded a call center. What talk about that a little bit?
Founded a. Just one more time.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. The radio show you were talking about.
Yeah, the radio show. Well, that's an interesting story, right? And I'm very open about it. When the station asked me to do a show, I had never thought I was going to do a radio show, right? I didn't have it in me, had no interest. And I do a lot of work amongst lifting up professionals in the Asian community as well. And so they basically said, we have a 9 million listener addressable market here in Silicon Valley and San Francisco.
Wow.
That's the population. And over 50% of the population of listeners happen to be Asian on this network. And that of the listenership of the radio station is Asian, and we have 0 local Asian radio hosts. And that's what got me. And so it took me about 6 months, but I decided I was going to do a show, and I would happen to be Asian, but it would not be an Asian show. And I'm pleased to say it's not that it's planned that way, but if people look at my guests over the last 3.5 years, over 2/3 are women and underserved communities. And that's just because I think those stories don't often get highlighted. So it's been actually a great journey.
Great. That's great, man. Oh, well, that's wonderful.
One of the things, Keith, that you and I were talking about the other day, and I'm in awe of all that you have done, not just integrating acquisitions, but integrating your faith into the world. Into the business world. Curtis and I have talked. We've got a number of friends that have talked about the paucity of representation of African Americans, of women, of Asians in the senior ranks. Why do you think it is? And well, before I ask that question, what we talk about a lot is the fear of failure that as somebody of one of those groups that I just mentioned, as they get the opportunity, they're almost afraid that if they fail, it's going to reflect badly on their group. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. How does the fear of failure affect your career? And it really, there's statistics on this too, actually. There's a study created by my mentors. They were executives at Cisco Systems, so Buck Chi and Denise Peck. They've, for the last 14 or 15 years, have self-funded a study of how Asians reach leadership ranks in Silicon Valley. And now it's been more broadly across the United States. And as typical, as expected with Asians, in order for them to be fair and complete, they actually did the analysis for all ethnic groups. So they did it for Blacks and Latinx and Caucasians. And they did it between men and women. And what the study shows is that, yes, Asians in Silicon Valley, for instance, do command 60% of the population of professionals. They only reach the 10% of executive ranks, defined as most people would understand, as director and above. So yes, Asians would never be counted as a minority in the workforce. They would never have any type of marketing or ranking of being underserved. But at the executive ranks, they almost don't exist. And you can even split that further between the 10%, as 7% being South Asian or Indians mostly, and then the 3% all other Asians. So that's one factor. And then when we get to Blacks and Latinx, they have made marginal increases over a decade. They've made marginal improvements. The real group that's actually improved the most compared to Caucasian male executives have been female Caucasian executives, but only in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, not anywhere else in the country. So it actually says that the tech community is very progressive in trying to promote and lift up others. But I think you make a really good point, because as much as statistics are easy to read and say, why is that? And it's a little bit controversial when you explain it to people trying to help mentor them in their career. And I can talk about the Asian experience. The Eastern model of success in corporate versus the Western model is quite different. In the Eastern model, and I'll tie this in how this works with women as well. In the Eastern model, you graduate from university, you're put in a work group, the supervisors above you had your job. And as they rise up, they take the best and brightest from that group and they keep rising up and they keep going. And so it's a funnel, but it's really used by objective criteria. There's a little bit of subjectivity, but it's pretty much like Curtis and Jeff, you perform the best out of this group, you will be going up the ladder, and you don't ask for the promotion. You don't ask for promotions in Asian culture. And so eventually that just keeps narrowing, and eventually you're Xi Jinping, right? That's exactly the system that he comes out of. In the West, there's a lot more emphasis on what we call soft skills, charisma. Leadership is defined as how influential you are, right? So it can be both objective and subjective, and you might be qualified, you might not be qualified. We know, back to the science behind this, we know that in the West, especially men, they may be comfortable with accepting a new role with only 50% confidence that they would be successful. But we know amongst other cultures, especially with women, that they usually won't even apply for a role unless they are 80% confident of success in the role. So you can see that there's a big difference. And I think that is part of the reason why, whatever the statistics say, we don't train people broadly to understand these things. I spend a lot of time doing coaching of all professionals, especially people that I'm close to. I think the number one factor in a person's corporate career journey, and this isn't about whether there's systemic biases or not, it is being self-aware of the system that you're in and what changes can you make. And sometimes the change is to actually leave the company and go to another company, right? So it's a complex issue. I'm not going to be the one that says that it's black and white in regards to this. There's so many other factors involved in it, but the statistics are pretty glaring in how leadership and so the study has now expanded to publicly traded companies. So the leadership factor is pretty consistent across all these dynamics or variables.
It's incredible. There's a book that I read a while ago called Half the Sky, talking about the role of women. And it comes from Mao's quote that the women hold up half the sky, yet we give them so little of the credit. And we're pretty good at taking credit, but we're not really good at always taking responsibility. Curtis, you and I worked together at a bank. I had a ton of blind spots. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with blind spots from people like me?
You got to be, first of all, comfortable in your own skin, right? You have to know why you're there. When you know why you're there, then whatever comes up, obviously, I work with a lot of, in the brokerage industry you just don't see a lot of color in the boardroom. It just doesn't happen, right? And so you have to be cool with who you are. And then, once you're cool with who you are, you know why you're there, you absorb the culture, you examine it, and then, you kind of move on. Now, me being from the south side of Richmond, right? And bumping into you and brushing up on you, it was like, oh, this dude is kind of tough. So it's like, yeah, it was, we spoke the same language, right? But other guys are not like that. You know what I mean? Their skin is thin, right? And, hey, look, my father did not go to Bucknell, right? I'm not a trust fund baby, right? I had to work my way up to 101 California, street, right? And so, and then you just got to have a love for people, right? You got to have love for people. And then you just understand, and, I'm real clear, Jeff. When I walk in the room, I warm it up. I warm the room up, call it the color of my skin or the color of my personality. I warm that booker up. And, it makes it, I know why I was there. I knew why I was there. I was there to do a job. And I'm like one of my ex bosses. Hey, look, we're here to do a job. We're here to make money. If we become friends, that's okay. If we don't, we're here to make money. In our transaction, we actually developed a relationship, and we, found that we had more in common than not. You know, and that's why we continue to go. But, you know, you just got to know who you are. What do you think about that, Keith?
Oh, I think it is very appropriate to talk about how it's the connection, right? I mean, Jeff just asked what were his blind spots, and you were close to him in a work setting. And really, without being able to develop a personal connection, you would never be able to know. So here's a great example. This is a public story. Back to Buck G at Cisco. So Buck talked to John Chambers. So there are things called Employee Resource Group, or ERGs, right? So they're Black ERGs, Latinx ERGs, LGBTQ ERGs, Asian ERGs. So Buck G in the early 2000s, he was the only East Asian executive. And I say East Asian because there's a lot of South Asian executives. He's the only East Asian VP of engineering at Cisco Systems. And he tells John Chambers, and Buck tells this story all the time because he teaches these courses at Stanford. He said to John Chambers, hey, John, how many East Asian VPs of engineering are there in the company? He said, I don't know. He said, take a guess. Like 5, 10? No, you have one, and it's me.
Wow.
And so, you know, John, I love him as an executive. He just impacted a blind spot. He sees lots of Asians because they work. I mean, it's a huge percentage of the company, but not in leadership ranks. And the only Asians that were leaders at the time in engineering were Indian leaders. So, you know, John doesn't see the differentiation. And that's what John immediately said, oh, that is a problem, and funded Buck to start the Asian Employee Resource Group. So again, John's not a bad guy, but back to the blind spot. Nobody's ever telling him we don't show, for back to the Asians, we don't show up in any survey of being underrepresented in the workforce. And so there's no problem. And I totally get that. I get that unless you have the courage, you have the relationship. So you and Jeff have a tight knit relationship. It transcends race by any means, right? So you can just tell him, and Jeff's going to hear you.
So right? one of the funny stories, and Curtis, I'm not going to put any names in here, but so Curtis's father passed a couple of years ago, and having the homegoing celebration, and I got there early over at Curtis's church, Faith Church in East Oakland, beautiful church, and I'm in Curtis's office with a number of ministers, and they're Dr. So-and-so and the Reverend so-and-so, just incredible people. And one person comes in and says, hello, Dr. So-and-so, hello, Reverend so-and-so, and doesn't say anything to me. And I'm going, I know this person. And I finally said, hey. And the person said, oh, I thought you were the Undertaker. Because I was a white guy there.
Tell them who it was, dude.
You can tell them.
It was my wife.
Yeah, I mean, when it's out of context, I mean, you know how many times where I'm in a store or wherever and somebody's asking me for help, right? I mean, it's just expectation.
I thought I was the only one that got that, man. I'm like, so I'll tell this one. I'm at this grocery store in Walnut Creek, right? Not Safeway, right? You know, SPROUTS, right?
Right.
And so, you know, I don't talk about it all the time, but I don't think, do I, Jeff? But anyway,
you should talk about it more.
That day I had my Harvard shirt on, right? You know, because I had the opportunity to go and study at the Harvard Divinity School for a year, right? So I'm like a Harvard fellow, right? Harvard fellow. Hey, fellow, what kind of fellow are you? Harvard. Anyway, but you know, fellows are a big deal because John Harvard himself was a fellow. And so I'm like standing in line, getting ready to check out, and I'm on the phone with my brother, right? And I guess the lady, she saw me on the phone, and she said, are you with, whatever one of those stores are where you go in and shop for people? You know, you put the app on the phone. Yeah, right.
I think it's
what's the name of it?
Anonymous shoppers.
Is it like
Instacart, something like that?
Postmates.
Yeah, Postmates, Instacart, right?
Right.
So look, I'm in the store. I got a Harvard shirt on, and she goes, "Are you with Instacart?" And I just started laughing, right? I was like, Dion, she just asked me, dude, if I would Instacart, and I'm standing here in my Harvard shirt on. He's cracked up. I said, no, ma'am, I'm not. But, you know, how's it going? And watch this. Ended up finding out after talking to the lady that she and I share the same birthday. April 5th. April 5th. So every time I go in the store, I say, hey, birthday girl. She says, hey, birthday boy. Right?
Yeah.
You know, people have blind spots, right? But what I have found is that once they realize what their blind spot is, they're willing to get rid of it. And we have to be, I think, in this country, in this culture, you know, those of us who may be the recipients of blind spots, you know, hey, look, you know, as long as you know who you are, right? You know, then it's an experience for you to share with them who you are and then get to know who they are to help, you know, erase, you know, that blind spot, you know, because there could always be a burgeoning relationship anywhere as long as you get out of your comfort zone.
So now I do have a good story. So the Sprouts here in Fremont.
Another Sprout story. Hey, Sprouts, how's it going? Yeah.
No, my friend Darian, who's a brother, he actually got recruited to be on Top Chef. Not Top Chef. The other show with Gordon Ramsay, the cook-off one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he didn't get profiled there, but that was good.
You know, we just starting to touch on blind spots and the like, and the ERGs, and getting to know somebody better. I'm the oldest one in the group here by 6 years over Curtis and about 15 over you, Keith. I grew up in the military. It was a place where your uniform was the thing that you saw, but I was standing in line one time, or standing in formation in college, Naval Academy, and I look up and down the line. I'm not supposed to move my head, but I did, and realized we're all dressed the same. We all look the same, and had the wonderful message came through me that, okay, it's not how you look that makes you who you are. You've got to be who you are. You've got gifts from God that help you to be who you are, to be the most you can be. I know that when I went through, we had no idea that Christians were a minority in the workforce. It was never talked about. And you're probably about a generation group away from me. And what are you finding out in the workforce today? Are Christians a minority? Is it a prosecuted minority? Is it just a silent majority? Where are we?
So this is a good question, because as we talked about this, right? I'm going to say that absolutely you can be a cultural believer, a cultural Christian, and not feel that you're persecuted. I think the persecution, or the feeling of persecution, are the people that are trying to live their faith. I think there is definitely in the Valley a reluctance to be open about your faith because of the stigma by some, especially people who consider themselves intellectual, that to believe in a God is somehow diminished by your intelligence diminished, or something about your character is flawed. Because we live in an age where people identify Christianity, if you follow Christianity, not as just a culture, but as a faith, that you're intolerant, that you're hateful. And that's the expectation that people have. So now when you hear about a practicing Christian or evangelical Christian or something like that, there's a trigger there because there's some type of identity associated with you. So I want to be clear. I think it's not so much the persecution is overt. It could be just completely unseen. And that's those words again that we use often in other cultures of toxic invisibility, right? So there are people who identify as being Christian and are fine at work. There are people that want to, you cannot share your faith at work. That is like a no-no, right? You are trained in corporate settings that you should not openly talk about religion and politics and gender issues. You just don't go there, right? And so the only way that you could speak about your faith just even casually would be in a casual setting, so outside of the workplace, but not in a work sponsored event either, right? So now you have to figure out the rules. I mean, we do a lot of training in the workforce for us to be very aware of diversity and inclusion, which is great. But there's nobody really spends the time to tell a Christian what they're supposed to be able to do and not do in the workforce, because we're assumed as the majority.
That's great, Keith. I guess I would probably be a pretty difficult hire, huh?
Why would you say that, Curtis? Why would you say you're a difficult hire?
Because I've been a minister since I was 19. And so I'm like 59. So I've been in ministry of some form or shapes for the last 4 decades. But I have worked in corporate America. I've worked for the equitable, right? And then, when I got my Series 7, I worked from all the way to Mid-California Street, all the way up to 601. I used to work right across the street from Bain Capital. I worked with Gary Shimano, the Shimano Group, right? And then, I ended up working at 101 California with Jeff Healy. And it was very clear in every interview that I had. It's like, so you're a minister? It's like, yeah, I am. Right? And that's
well, I think it depends on industry. I think it depends on what role you're playing, right? I think that let's say that you're going to be an accountant or an engineer, where it's pretty easy, should I say easy, it's straightforward to measure the qualification of the individual. Mm-hmm. I would probably say that back to all factors being equal, and if you're being very open about your faith, yeah, you might get passed up, right? If you're in a profession that, especially in sales, right? A lot of Christians in sales, it takes a certain type of person to be very successful in sales. When I used to manage as a customer, I used to manage relationships with companies like IBM or HP or EMC or NetApp, these technology names. The majority of people I interacted with were usually a semi-pro athlete or a collegiate athlete. I don't know if you ever noticed this in sales, but in tech sales.
I have,
right,
yeah.
Right. So I don't know your profession as well in terms of what roles you played with Jeff, but I think people who are evangelistic make great salespeople. So I don't think that they would ever hold back. And, the Mormon community, Latter-day Saints, they're all over in the tech community as sales leaders. Mm-hmm. One of my really good friends has been consistently the head of sales for many cybersecurity companies. And so, there's caveats here, right? There's like G&A functions, back office functions, corporate functions, and then there's sales teams. I think people with faith make excellent sales leaders.
I grew up in Belleville, Illinois, and we talked about this the other day. It was right across the river from St. Louis. It was the area in the early 1900s. There was the Great Migration focused on that area. There was a lot of labor jobs in the St. Louis area that they were having strikes, and scab labor came up from the south. It was black, but it was scab labor. It wasn't that blacks were coming up, it was scabs were coming up. Unfortunately, it was very easy to identify somebody that was in the workforce. If they were black, they were probably a scab. And it was such an unfair way to get that going. The minister at our church was just phenomenal. Went down to Selma, and we were taught from day one, it's what's on the inside that counts. Now, I bring that up, being in sales for almost my entire career. Everything I do is in sales. I'm running a fund right now. It's in sales. I've done this and that. It's in sales. I ran a couple of software companies. It was in sales. CEO means you're the number one salesperson. Right? Now, when I read Jesus saying, "Render under Caesar what is Caesar's, render under God what is God's," for me, it was a little more nuanced than that, in that it really was, who is my God? Is the coin my God, or is God my God? If I think what Jesus was telling me was that you're going to have a God in your life. Is it going to be the coin? or is it going to be your redemption? And it was a pretty easy choice for me to make. Curtis and I practice this thing we call +1. In the binary world, things are zeros and ones, right? I had a wonderful word come into my mind late one night about 5 years ago, and it was trinary. And I thought to myself, I'd never heard of the word trinary before, never. But it just came in. My radio receiver was on properly, and I thought, well, what's trinary? And I thought it could be this. And I got up the next morning and looked it up, and one of the two definitions is what I thought it would be. And trinary can be -1, 0, +1, where trinary is 0, 1. So how does that apply? If I'm talking about being a racist in a binary world, if I'm a racist, I'm a 0. If I'm colorblind, I'm a 1. In a trinary world, if I'm a racist, I'm a -1. If I'm colorblind, I'm a 0. If I'm working for racial justice, I'm a +1. So I think God was telling us we got to be +1s in the world. Doing no harm is great, but how do we do good? That's the real great.
What do you think about that, Keith?
It's a good point. I mean, we've talked about comparisons, right? During the Holocaust, there's stories of Christian churches as the Jews were being rounded up on trains, that the Christians would just sing louder during worship because they didn't want to hear the screams. My family in China during the Japanese invasion, although there may not be any official accounts of it actually happening, that the Nazis had instructed the Japanese to round up Jews. There's a huge Jewish population in Shanghai, where my family's from. There's Jewish sections of the city. And my mom had told me that when I was a kid, even before I could even understand about race relations, that her family had been harboring Jews, Russian Jews, during the Japanese invasion. It's how my grandmother learned how to make hard candy. And I'm like, why would Jews be in your house? And she's like, because the Japanese were looking for them. And that would be a +1 for me. I mean, when I think about what happened, I've been to Anne Frank Huis, so Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam, right? And they talked about how they were being harbored as well, harbored by believers also, right? So, I mean, I think that is exactly what believers are called to do. So the +1 makes all the sense in the world. Well, I think the key back to, I think what the theme of where we're headed with this is in terms of being in the Western world, unless you tell people or help them identify that they don't know, right? It's more of an ignorance thing. I don't think, I mean, I could argue in the Holocaust sense that the Christians did know, but I mean, in the world that we live in, and also why I was making the hypothesis that Christians may be persecuted in the workforce, is that there are no support systems or structures. We don't actually train people on this. We don't explain it to them. And that's ignorance.
Right.
So go ahead.
Yeah. No, you were at Cisco, right? And was it Cisco?
I was at Cisco twice for a cumulative 10 years. Yes.
Right. Not Oracle, but Cisco.
No, I was not at Oracle.
You're not with Larry Ellison. You're with John Chambers.
Yes.
All right, great. I read the book, The Silicon Valley, The Silicon Boys in the Valley of Dreams. I think it's a fascinating book, man. It talks about all that stuff, right? So I mean, did you come under attack, at all for your stance on Christianity while you worked at Cisco?
Not at Cisco, never. Not when I was there. It could be, be careful. I actually run and own the Cisco Facebook alumni group. And so I get to see a lot of conversation because I allow Cisco employees to be part of it. They just can't. I won't get into all the details. I have a Cisco Facebook group. There's 5,000 active people on it. 15% of the population are current Cisco employees. And my quip is that everyone is either and existing or future alumni, right? So, and it's great because what made that group successful is that a bunch of .com executives, not the ones who got super rich, but the ones that were, we loved being at a special place at a special time. I'm not going to say that today's Cisco is yesterday's Cisco, right? Although it's welcome to everyone. So no, I didn't face any persecution, I would say, at Cisco for being open about my faith. I could say that I irritated some coworkers sometimes, people I spent a lot of time with. I mean, in a role doing M&A integration where you're traveling 80% of the time, you spend a lot of time with your coworkers, more than you'd spend with, at the time, my girlfriend, later my wife. But I spent so much more time with them than I spent with my family or my friends, because during the .com era, I didn't even know what country I was in sometimes. So you form very close bonds. And I'd say I was in those dinners and offsite meetings and just on planes. I do a lot of my best sharing on planes, actually. You're just there. You got a captive audience, right? So you just talk and you talk and talk. And I'd say a couple of people got irritated enough to say, hey, why don't you cool it?
Really?
Right?
Yeah, there's an anonymity when you're on a plane. You're gonna be with them, and you're gonna be right next to them for a number of hours. Back when we could fly, but then you're not going to see them in many cases.
No, it was never a stranger. It was never a stranger that told me to quit it. It was close colleagues and friends.
I love that even more. So, doing the integration. Just a question. You were doing a lot of the data integration. Data is data. It's zeros and ones. How much time did you have to spend on the people side of the data, and how was that?
So my role is coordination. So as the running the program management office of integrating companies, it's all about people, and it's all about companies that wanted to keep their phone number. So back then, Cisco went out of their way to keep acquisitions happy. So they're probably the most happy acquired people ever. There was one case where a company named Celsius Systems out of Dallas, Texas, and it was funny because their headquarters was right next to Mary Kay headquarters, like next door. They had chosen to let Cisco acquire them for stock, and they rejected Microsoft, and it was a $60 million price difference. And back in 1999, that's a big deal. And they wanted the culture. They wanted to be with a company like Cisco. And so it's all about the people. And the whole thing about the Sun Microsystems, when they went down the tubes, everyone, all the analysts, you might have still been in banking, all the analysts in the world said Cisco's going to buy them. It makes sense. The employees are cut from the same cloth, same culture, right? But what was different was the senior executive culture was different. Right. And without sharing too much out of school, the only time I've ever seen John Chambers say anything remotely negative is that he was at he was doing a keynote at a Samsung conference in Korea. And this is when IBM tried to do a hostile takeover of Sun Microsystems, and Larry Ellison came in as a white knight. Now think about this. Let's set this up. Sun Microsystems ultimately sold for, I think, between $7 to $8 billion. Cisco bought a company in 2000 called Cerent for about $7 or $8 billion in stock, right? So a company of tens of thousands of employees. They used to call themselves the .com, the dot in .com. They're going down the tubes, and there's so much I cannot talk about. But Chambers said, if we wanted to buy Sun, we would have done it. That's the first time he's ever said anything like that. Mm-hmm. And back to Ellison being the white knight. Well, Ellison and Scott McNealy are very good friends. And Scott McNealy said to Larry, can you make this work? And Larry went over Safra Katz's head, his number two, because she's all about software. He's like, I'm going to make this work. And so they bought the company out from under IBM. And it was arguably who's better, who's worse. But that was all about relationship. And that goes to the crux of what Jeff was asking about. The jobs I've always had were always about relationship.
I'm going to go off on a tangent real quick and come back. Because it's one of those things that frankly, as I've gotten older, it really confounds me. Curtis, what does it feel like when the white knight's the good guy and the black knight's the bad guy?
What does it feel like?
And did you ever think about how come Santa Claus is white in all the cartoons? How come this and that? It's
culture, right? When you when you learn better, you do better, right? And then when you have exposure, you know, to different cultures, it helps you to digest and assimilate even your own culture. So I do know that, right? You know, in the West, you know, the color that Keith is wearing, which I like that black shirt. It is matching his black hair. I used to have black hair. But no, man, it's a different. Now, Eastern culture. Correct me if I'm wrong, Keith. You know, black is the totally opposite, right? The color black.
Well, in Eastern culture, you don't wear black or white. They both symbolize death. So, like, you wouldn't wear that. So right now is in the middle of Lunar New Year. I'm Chinese, so I call it Chinese New Year. You wear red, and red's not my color. But yes, both black and white symbolize bad omens and death. But we're believers, so it doesn't really matter to us. But yes.
Right. So, you know,
wait.
Okay.
Gung Hai Fat Choi.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, what was that? Okay. Anyway, so no, I heard it. So, you know, to answer your question, Healy, it's like it's how you perceive that, right? For instance, in African cosmology, right, heaven is a concept that is not above, is a concept that is below, because in African cosmology, the focus is on your ancestors, you know, those who have passed and who have gone on, right? And so they don't pray up, they pray down. However, in Western theology, we pray up. We call heaven the sky, and we call hell the ground. So, you know, that's why you have to know and learn as much as you can about different people, because the more you do that, the more you understand your own humanity, and then you can start becoming, I guess in tech words, an integrated circuit for humanity. How you are able to splice in and make these circuits work at an equal capacity to get the maximum output that's on that board, you know, of humanity. You know, so I think that, you know, what happens in America, you know, I'm like this. I was thinking the other day, you know, it got to be hard to be a white guy in America, right? You got to be Superman, right? You got to have a cape. You got to have a big S on your chest. You got to be able to fly. You know, you got to have that little curly hair thing right down there in the middle. You know, it's like, that's a lot of pressure, you know, to be the ultimate. And I think it makes guys lose their mind. Actually, it's like they snap, you know, like all day long, because, you know, the reality is that, and I want to use this to move into a segment, Keith. I want you to kind of fill in the blanks on this, because I think that the problem that we have with racism in America is because we haven't looked at the real evil, which is classism. Can you talk about classism a little bit? You know, are you a little versed on that somewhat?
Yeah, I can talk about it. I want to be clear. This is not my profession. I did take, you know, I was an organizational behavior major, so there's a lot of sociology in that. I will talk about it in terms of classism. I think immigration anywhere in the world, but especially in the US, you know, the US has 43% of all immigrants in the entire world, right? So if you think about all immigrants anywhere, it's not a normal thing to be an immigrant. So the US houses over 43% of the world's immigrants in one country, right? So we're a nation of immigrants. So when I think about looking at even back to colonial times, and yes, differentiating by skin color, it was always about economic prosperity, right? It was always about finding cheap labor, however you define it, and exploiting that labor for personal gain. And so, of course, we know all about colonial times. We all know about slavery. And then when we start getting into the 1800s, even before the Chinese came, you know, Italians and Irish were also subjugated, were also considered, in terms of classism, right? They were considered cheap labor. They came in through indentured servants usually. So in the Asian diaspora, Chinese started coming in the 1850s. Some immigrated willingly, some were in essence indentured servants, and some were kidnapped. And they were working on railroads, or working the gold rush. And then there's too many of them. And so we enacted laws. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was the first exclusionary law in the United States. And it was really driven by San Francisco Irish and Italians, right? Because we were competing with them. And so it wasn't that we were competing with white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. We were competing with Catholic Irish Italian, right? And then when that happened, and this is an aside, because I've made, after my mom passed last year, I've been doing research on my family. I found out that her grandmother, so my great grandmother, and her adopted brothers and sisters were some of the first Chinese. They were the first Chinese, the first Asians to graduate from the University of Michigan, because they were adopted by an American missionary, and she wanted them to go to school in Michigan, and she had to adopt them to make them American citizens so that they would not have to be subject to these exclusionary laws. So when the Chinese rose up, people thought, they got the only Chinese that were really successful were the laundromats and the restaurants and the general store. That's where that whole analogy comes from. Then the Japanese were rising up. In 1906, they had the Gentleman's Agreement. There's too many Japanese, and then they were interned in World War II. The Filipinos were a colony of the United States, and when they got too many United States as cheap labor, they were emancipated, which made them lose their American citizenship. Right, so it goes on and on and on, and you can identify it as racism because you can identify them by skin color, but you can also identify it as classism, that there was a certain group getting economic gain, and it was upsetting the establishment, whatever the establishment is, and so therefore you had to change the dynamic, and it kept going on through. In the Vietnam era, the U.S. tried to make it a different model. That's why the Vietnamese were scattered. And Southeast Asians were scattered all throughout the U.S. But what did they do? They wanted to build community. So they actually self-congregated into San Jose, into Fresno, into Houston, right? And you see into Minnesota. And then finally, when NAFTA occurred, we had an unlimited source of inexpensive labor. And so it just, the whole paradigm shifted again. But that's just to say, back to classism, of course it's there, right? But now the question is, what are we going to do about it?
Right. And I think that's the real discussion, because racism bores me. It really does. You could talk about it all day long. Like, Jeff's a white guy, Kurt's a black guy, Keith's a Chinese guy. I got to tell you something. I love this color book right here, bro. I love it. I love this right here, bro. The only thing we need is a Hispanic lady. Then we like, bam, we'll just be killing it, right?
So it's part of it, if you will, is follow the money, and that is there. Curtis and I have talked about this. I read a book 26 years ago that was very informative for me. It was called The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism by Novak. And what Novak talked about was that there are three elements that really are responsible for the success or failure of a society. There's the government, taking care of the people, making sure the people aren't put to wrong tasks. There's business that creates the jobs, creates manufacturing, things of that sort. And then there's the moral compass. And those three, and the moral compass has been filled by the church for many years, although we always have people in every industry looking for power. But Novak's point was that if these three, government, business, and moral compass, are in tension with each other, if they hold each other accountable, they effectively work as three legs on a stool that keep the oppression from crushing the people. When they collude, the people don't have a chance. And that's why we have 43% of the world's immigrants, is we still have that. We gotta earn it every day. We've got to earn the title of being the nation with the moral compass.
Mm-hmm. And that's under pressure.
Yeah, it's getting hard.
Go ahead, Keith.
What's interesting is our common friend, Phil Dillard. Phil is very, he's trying to get the terminology more out in the world, which is called the fourth sector. And really the fourth sector is a brand of sustainable investment and development. It is back to what you just said, Jeff. So you've got the public sector, you've got the private sector, you've got the government, right? You've got NGOs, you've got nonprofits. All these groups, how do they participate together in creating a better framework and a better model? I'm still exploring it as well, but you have CEOs like Mark Benioff talking about conscious capitalism, right? Capitalism's been a bad word for a long time, but if we really look at the biblical principle of a thriving economic model, it was the free market versus capitalism. Capitalism gets exploited, right? A free market where people are acting, the model of Christian governance in the Bible was a free market economy, and that would then drive donations and charity and all that. It was explicit. I mean, Curtis could probably talk about it better than I could, but there was a model, a framework that Jesus left for us and how we actually serve others. And I think when we start to take, this is my hypothesis, when you start to take faith, when we talk about separation of church and state, yes, we get that from a governing framework, but when you start to take faith out of people, the people who identify with faith, that's where the failure and the breakdown occurs, because now it's not ingrained in your psyche that giving and being charitable is part of the fabric of society. It's not there.
Right. Matthew 25:35, Matthew 25:36, through about Matthew 25:40. We're not going to quote scripture. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was sick and in prison,
Right.
did you visit me? Sometimes you need an angel, and sometimes it's your job to be an angel.
That's right.
Exactly. I think one of the things that comes out is that we have to understand that Christianity is not a flag. Christianity is a passion. It is a lifestyle.
It's a verb.
A discipline, right? It's action. It's a
verb.
And I think that what happens in America is that, like for instance, I was reading Pew Research the other day, right? And 37% of America reads their Bible at least once a week, right? 37% reads the greatest narrative that we've ever heard of once a week. And then there's 25% that just don't read it at all, right? And if you said to someone, do you go to church? They will go, yes, right? Jeff says Christianity is a verb. They will go, yes, but I mean, how are you active in that community when you go once a quarter, right? And then you look at the civil rights movement that occurred, and we still, the Black church still, embraces that because it was somewhere where we could go where we could not be disturbed until they found out what we were doing in church, which led to the bombings of churches, throughout the South, right? And even as close as last year, my friend Michael McBride put a banner up on his church in Berkeley, Black Lives Matter, and they not only did they tear the sign down, but they tried to set his church on fire, right? Keith, my thing, man, is that Christianity is not a shirt that you wear, but Christianity is something that you do. We got 5 more minutes, Keith. Give us some good closing thoughts. Give us a good wrap.
Well, I think the good closing thoughts is that, as you said, the 3 of us represent a really good model. We just need somebody who's Latinx, right, and a female. Mm-hmm. We should have some women's voices on here. But I think I think the dialogue. I think again, it's easy, especially with lockdown, where people are not actually physically engaging with each other. It's important to have open discussion, build relationship, build connections, and be able to speak freely within those groups, right? Because the more that we're isolated and the more that we're not having those conversations, it gets worse. There was a whole discussion, and I don't have an opinion myself on it yet. I can see both arguments about cancel culture, right? So I'm doing a lot of discussions on a social media app that's going viral called Clubhouse. And that's probably the most raw, most organic, verbal, it's audio only, verbal discussion. So I'm in groups with thought leaders in technology and artificial intelligence. And we've had hours long conversations with 1,000 people listening to us. talking about the ethics around technology. And so what came up in this last discussion was one of the foremost professors of artificial intelligence was hosting this workshop, and we had people from Google and Facebook who all said we can't talk on behalf of the company, but about the position that it's better to moderate content, which means censorship. Some views of censorship of content that might be seen as insightful or hateful. But on the other hand, the argument is, but if you cancel it, then people are just going to go underground and talk about it in private, and now you're not going to know what they're saying at all, right? It's going to happen. So I think back to where I'm going with this is that the more genuine connections we make, the less colorblind, the more colorblind we become, and the more authentic we become. And that's what I really like about this platform as well as Clubhouse, is that it's a platform for authentic conversation.
Right. How do we know more about Clubhouse?
Oh, I can. You have to be on an iPhone or an iPad, and it's invite only. So I can definitely, offline, I can definitely hook you guys up.
Okay. I guess I got to go get an iPhone.
So Keith,
or an iPad.
iPad. Fortunately, I sell those.
They say the Android platform should be out within 6 months.
Great.
Okay.
And Curtis and I have talked about this many times, and I completely agree with you, Keith, and I love this. This is one of my most fun hours of the week. It's one of Curtis and I probably talk 12, 15 hours a week. It's incredible. One of the most segregated parts of America before COVID would meet once a week. And this was the most segregated sector. And it was church. You had a black church, you had an Asian church, you had a white church. This really good friend of mine preached at the church that I attended years ago. And one of the first things he said was, I take it on good authority that heaven is integrated. So let's start practicing it now.
My parting thought is this. I study a lot about biblical history. If we go to the story of the Tower of Babel, you had one family, Noah's family, who had 3 sons. And I might get this, I think I got this right. He had 14 sons, and they had 72, I think they had 70 to 72 sons, great-grandsons. And they were all the ethnicities recorded in the Bible. And even to this day, Orthodox Jews still count those 70 plus as unique ethnicities. They were all together during the Tower of Babel time. That's why God separated them. There wasn't this concept of ethnicity. You can read the stories between Esau and Jacob. They looked physically different. The diversity, we're self-selecting. God didn't intend us to be individual races, right? He only made one race, the human race. And as Kurt just said, when we get to our ultimate place, there's not going to be any differentiation.
You knew that it was Curtis that said that, didn't you?
I did.
That's funny. Yeah, I preached at his church, man, and they laughed actually. And but anyway, listen, it's been a great hour with Pepper and with Keith. I love your last name, Cool. It's like my son. I was like, I say, "How you doing, son?" He'll go like, "Cool." Seriously, like that, which is like it's supposed to be cool.
I got it.
Yeah, I'm cool, man. I'm cool. But anyway.
Hey,
So
Keith,
listen.
Yeah, one more, Keith. You make us better. We want you to come back anytime.
Oh, thank you. You both make me better as well, and I hope to come back. So thank you, and I want you on the show that I'm doing that's coming up in a couple of months. So
okay, great. Yeah, because I have a fascinating essay on the ethics of technology and artificial intelligence.
That's great.
That's a big topic.
Once you're in Clubhouse, you can come into one of our rooms. You can talk about it with one of the leading.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. It was a hot topic at the H. I call it the H. But it was a hot topic on campus, man. So, but again, God bless you. God bless you, Jeff. I love you. And listen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hanging out with us today on Momentum, a Stewardship Idea. Have a great weekend. We love you. See you guys later.